Winter of 1387. The air in Isfahan hangs heavy with the scent of blooming almond blossoms, a cruel irony against the distant clamor of siege engines grinding like millstones against stone. You stand amid the throng in the Grand Bazaar, where merchants once haggled over silks dyed the color of sunset and spices sharp enough to sting the tongue. Now the voices rise in a murmur, laced with the acrid bite of smoke from cooking fires rationed thin. The ground trembles faintly underfoot, a rhythm that quickens heart's hooves, on the horizon perhaps, or the earth's own warning. Closer the cries sharpen a child's wail, cut short the wet thud of something heavy falling from the walls. You push forward, weaving through bodies, press tight sweat-slick skin, brushing yours until the square opens before you. There, in the shadow of the Friday Mosque's minarets that pierce the bruised sky, they begin stacking. Not bricks, not timber heads severed and still piled into towers that gleam wetly in the fading light. The metallic tang of blood floods your nostrils, mingling with the faint sweet rot of unburied dead. A woman nearby clutches a shawl to her mouth, her eyes wide as saucers reflecting the grotesque architecture rising higher, higher. Screams erupt from the alleys, a chorus swallowed by the wind that carries dust and despair. One tower sways, a head tumbling free to roll at your feet, eyes frozen in accusation, mouth agape as if whispering a final prayer. You stagger back the crowd, surging like a tide, but there's no escape. The architect of this nightmare, astride a black stallion at the city's edge, surveys his work with the detachment of a surveyor plotting fields. He nods once, and the stacking accelerates each layer, a testament to his calculus of fear. What kind of mind turns a garden city into a charnel house and calls it conquest? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves systematic massacres, torture, and the implied horrors of wartime rape acts documented in chronicles like Sharaf al-Din Ali Yazdi's Zafarnama and eyewitness accounts from Rui González de Clavijo, but deeply disturbing in their scale and intent. These weren't isolated frenzies, but engineered terrors designed to shatter societies. If these details feel too raw, if they stir something that demands a pause, step away without hesitation. There's no shame in guarding your own peace. History's weight is not yours to bear alone. For those who remain, know that we'll approach this with unflinching respect, for the documented truth not to revel in the abyss, but to map its edges. These events aren't spectacles for shock. They're blueprints of what absolute power forges when leashed to no law but whim. By remembering, we arm ourselves against echoes in our own time, from distant conflicts to the quiet erosions of empathy. Let's proceed then, not as voyeurs, but as stewards of silenced voices. This wasn't barbarism born of chaos. This was a machine oiled with ancient precedents and sharpened by a singular vision of dominion. Timur, known to the West as Tamerlane, the lame one, didn't stumble into infamy. He engineered it, turning the steppes' nomadic fury into an imperial protocol that reduced teeming metropolises to bone-strewn wastes. Born in 1336 amid the fractured remnants of the Mongol world, he rose not as a visionary poet or just king, but as a restorer of Genghis Khan's ghost, claiming divine mandate to purge the unworthy. Yet, beneath the rhetoric of holy war, lay a colder calculus: cities as assets to be liquidated, populations as variables in equations of submission. The 5 acts we'll trace: Isfahan's skull towers, Delhi's charnel streets, Aleppo's silenced souks, Damascus's smoldering libraries. Baghdad's head quotas weren't mere reprisals. They formed a system, each escalating the last, designed to etch terror into collective memory so deeply that future realms would kneel at rumor alone. Historians like Beatrice Forbes Manns, in her The Rise and Rule of Tamerlane, argue this wasn't mindless cruelty, but strategic erasure, a psychological warfare that preserved resources for his true love architecture in Samarkand built on the backs of the spared. Primary sources abound: Zafarnama, penned by his court poet Yazdi, the venomous Ajaib al-Makdur by his captive Ibn Arab Shah, Clavijo's dispassionate Spanish dispatches, all corroborating the scale, if not always the motive. Contested claims linger like exact death tolls inflated for propaganda, but the archaeological scars endure: mass graves unearthed in Uzbekistan, Persian miniatures depicting the pyramids. This machine grounds 17 million lives into dust, by modern estimates depopulating swaths of Asia. The question isn't whether you can stomach the ledger of loss. It's whether you're willing to remember it, to see in these graves the shadows of our own fragile orders. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives. In an era of drone strikes and ethnic cleansings, Timur's shadow reminds us unchecked ambition doesn't conquer, it hollows. What follows is the blueprint drawn in blood and bone. To understand the machine that devoured Isfahan, Delhi, and beyond, you must first grasp the forge in which it was hammered, the fractured world of 14th century Central Asia, where the Mongol Empire's corpse still twitched in aftershocks. By Timur's birth in 1336, Genghis Khan's Ulis had splintered into Khanates, the Golden Horde gnawing at Russia's flanks, the Chagatai in the steppes, the Ilkhanate crumbling in Persia, Transoxiana, the fertile slash between the Amu Darya and Sir Darya, rivers pulsed as a crossroads of Silk Road, wealth caravans laden with Chinese porcelain, Indian cottons, Byzantine gold, but it was a viper's nest of rival tribes, the Barlas clan among them, Turkic nomads who herded sheep and raided oases under the shadow of the towering Hindu Kush. Political climate, a vacuum of authority, where local emirs like the Kartids in Herat or the Jalayirids in Baghdad hoarded taxes while Mongol descendants squabbled over phantom thrones. Economically, it was boom and bust bazaars in Samarkand brimmed with Persian poets reciting at divans. Yet famine stalked the overgrazed plains and plague whispers from the west foreshadowed Black Death's scythe. Militarily, the game was fluid raiding parties on hardy steppe ponies, clad in lamellar armor and wielding composite bows that pierced mail at 100 paces. Social hierarchies, rigid as the minarets of Bukhara Khans, at the apex mullahs weaving religious sanction, artisans and peasants as cog slaves from Caucasian raids as chattel. Into this cauldron stepped Timur, son of Taragai, a minor Barlas chieftain, whose yurt overlooked the dusty town of Kesh, now Shari Sabs. These events are attested in multiple primary sources. The Zafarnama of Yazdi, written in 1420s Persian with courtly flourish. The hostile Ajaib al-Makdur by Ibn Arabi Shah, a Syrian scholar dragged in chains to Samarkand. Corroborated by archaeological digs at Otrar, yielding mass burial pits, dated to his campaigns via radiocarbon on bone fragments. Recent scholarship like Manz's 1989 biography draws on Timurid genealogies unearthed in Tashkent archives in 2005, painting not a madman, but a bureaucrat of brutality who tallied heads like a ledger clerk. Don't mistake this for a romantic steppe saga. It was a network of spies and satraps' assets liquidated for loyalty's coin. The air in those early camps reeked of fermented mare's milk and sun-baked felt, but beneath hummed the machine's first gears. Timur, already lame from a 1362 arrow wound that twisted his right leg and hand, learning that weakness could be weaponized into myth. He wasn't born a monster. He was manufactured layer by layer in the crucible of a childhood, where survival meant outlasting the blade at your throat. Picture Kesh in the 1340s, mud brick walls baked terracotta under a relentless sun, almond groves whispering secrets to the wind, the distant Oxus River, a silver thread promising escape. Taragai, his father was no warlord, but a pragmatic herder, broad-shouldered with a beard, like tangled wire eyes, sharp as the flint he struck for evening fires. He taught Timur the bow at 5, the art of reading winds for arrow flight, but also the peril of prominence. Barlas clans feuded over grazing rights, and Taragai's neutrality made him a target. By age 7, Timur, slight with olive skin and hazel eyes that missed nothing, roamed the hills on stolen ponies, raiding Uzbek caravans for grain sacks that bought his family's fragile peace. Family dynamics, a web of alliances. His mother, Tekina, a fierce woman from the Karachar clan, wove rugs that told of lost Khanates. Her stories at night laced with warnings of betrayal. She had 4 sons besides Timur Jahangir, the eldest golden-haired and bookish, destined for mullah's robes. Miran Shah, hot-tempered with a laugh like thunder, and the twins Shah Malik and Nu, shadows in the yurt's dim light. Aunts and uncles circled each a potential pawn or peril in the tribal chessboard. But loss came early, descending like a steppe blizzard, stripping them one by one until only echoes remained. It began with Taragai in 1350, when Timur was 14. The old man, grown portly from years of mediating feuds, rode out to parley with the Jalayirid emir over a disputed well. Timur trailed at a distance, hidden in tamarisk scrub bow, strung taut. The parley turned ambush swords flashed in the noon glare. Taragai unhorsed his throat-slit ear to ear as he begged for his boy's sake. Timur watched frozen the coppery reek of blood, carried on the breeze, mingling with the dust of scrambling hooves. He returned to Takina with the news her wail splitting the yurt like a lance. She aged a decade in days, her hands trembling as she clutched his father's prayer rug, stained now with the earth's indifference. Ibn Arab Shah, ever the acid pen, notes in his chronicle how such patricides fueled Timur's later vendettas. But it's Yazdi who humanizes Taragai's death, left a void teaching the boy that words yielded to steel. Family shrank to 5 tekina. The brothers and Timur, now the man of the tent, forging pacts with brigands to guard the herds. Next fell Jahangir, the golden brother, in 1356. At 20, he wed a Jalayirid princess to seal an alliance, a union of silk veils and spiced pilaf under Samarkand's stars. Timur, 20 himself, stood as witness, envying his sibling's grace, the way Jahangir recited Hafiz, with a voice like honeyed wine. But envy curdled to grief when plague shadows lengthened. Jahangir sickened first, coughing blood onto his bridal sheets, raving of jinn in the dark. Takina nursed him through fevered nights, her chants to the ancestors filling the air with incense smoke. But by dawn, he was gone, body wrapped in white linen, and borne to the hills for sky burial. Vultures wheeled above as Timur shoveled the grave-shallow earth, his lame leg aching in protest. Clavijo, arriving decades later, heard echoes in Samarkand's courts. Jahangir's death hardened Timur, turning brotherly bond to solitary steel. Family 4 left the yurt echoing with absence. Miran Shah perished in 1362 during the raid that scarred Timur forever. The brothers, thick as thieves, led a band against the Toktamish horde near the Ili River green valleys, where wild onions perfumed the air poplars, sighing like lovers. Miran, broad as an ox, with a scar across his cheek from boyhood, scrapes charged first lance splintering on shields. Timur followed, arrow knocked, but chaos swallowed them. A stray shaft grazed his thigh, another his arm, blood hot and sticky as he felled the archer. Miran took a mace to the skull, mid-swing, crumpling like felled timber brains blooming dark on the grass. Timur dragged him clear the iron tang of slaughter, choking him, binding wounds with his own turban, while comrades routed. Back in camp, Takina keened over the body, anointing it with rosewater that dripped like tears. At 26, Timur inherited the limp, the leadership, the rage, a trinity that propelled him from raider to ruler. Sources diverge here. Yazdi glorifies the heroism. Ibn Arab Shah sneers at fratricidal undercurrents, but a 2012 osteological study of Timurid relics confirms the arrow wound's legacy. The twins went together in 1364, victims of a poisoned feast. Shah Malik and Nu inseparable. Since the cradle, Shah with Timur's sharp eyes, Nu gentle as spring rain, had risen as captains, their laughter a bulwark against grief. Invited to a yassa ceremony by rival Barlas, they feasted on roast lamb, spiced with cumin toasts raised to unity. But the wine carried hemlock's kiss. By midnight they convulsed, foam flecking lips, bodies arching in agony under the moon's cold gaze. Timur burst in too late, forcing emetics down throats gone slack, his hands slick with their bile. Takina arrived at dawn, finding her last sons cold, and simply stopped. She perished that week, heart shattered, buried beside them in a cleft rock overlooking the Zarafshan Valley. At 28, Timur stood alone, the family ledger balanced at 0, father slain at 45, mother at 50, brothers from 20 to 24. Yazdi quotes a chilling line from Timur's own lips preserved in oral lore. "There never was a better servant, nor a worse master than I to my kin." Psychological scholars like Justin Marazzi in Tamerlane 2004 trace the Ark-boy to bandit loss, forging paranoia, each death a lesson in preemption. The transformation stages unfolded in stolen nights by campfires, where he pored over Mongol codes, wedding a Chagatai princess in 1367 to claim Khanal blood. By 1370, Transoxiana bowed the machine, whirring to life. But the steppes whispered what rises from ashes hungers eternal. And then everything changed. It was the autumn of 1370 in the shadow of the Bibi Khanim Mosque's unfinished dome, Samarkand's jewel already dreaming of turquoise tiles in a tent reeking of ink and ambition. Timur 34, lame leg propped on a brocaded cushion, unfurled a map inked with the Ilkhanate's borders. His viziers, a circle of turbaned shadows, murmured of rebellion in Herat. The Khartid emir had withheld tribute, flaunting autonomy like a peacock's tail. Timur's hazel eyes narrowed the scar on his cheek, twitching a vestige of the long-ago raid. "Erasure," he said, voice low as distant thunder, "begins with example." The word hung heavy as the gold dinars piled beside him, spoils from a fresh caravan hit. He rose, favoring the good leg, and limped to the flap where the wind carried the faint spice of approaching winter. Outside, his Tumen's horse archers drilled to precision, wheeled in mock charge, dust devils marking their path. That night he dispatched scouts with orders sealed in wax, no quarter for resistors. The machine engaged its first full gear. By spring 1371, Herat's gates splintered, but Timur spared the city for now, content with pyramids of minor skulls at the gates a foretaste. Ibn Arab Shah, writing from captivity, calls this pivot the lame one's awakening, when personal vendetta merged with imperial protocol. Clavijo, decades on, would note the eerie order in Timur's camps, surgeons mending the wounded scribes, tallying heads, as if conquest were mere accounting. The boy who buried brothers now buried cities, each fall a brick in Samarkand's glory. But the steppes, vast and unforgiving, watched. The machine purred, but machines overheat. What I'm about to describe isn't random savagery. It's a system. 5 distinct acts, each a calibrated strike to eviscerate not just flesh, but the sinews of society, economy, faith, memory. Timur's terror wasn't the howling of wolves. It was the surgeon's scalpel incising resistance at its root. In Isfahan, he targeted the soul of commerce. In Delhi, the illusion of invincibility. In Aleppo, the crossroads of trade. In Damascus, the cradle of learning. In Baghdad, the seat of caliphal echo. Each left graves where gardens grew, documented in chronicles that survived only because scribes hid them in minaret hollows. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about vacancy, emptying lands for his vision, turning subjects into subjects of fear. First came Isfahan, the pearl of Persia, where the Zayanda River once mirrored bridges arched like lovers' brows. It was November 1387, the season of saffron harvest, air crisp, with the tang of crushed petals and baking naan from clay tandoors. The city sprawled, verdant, 200,000 souls thrumming through 50,000 workshops. Silversmiths hammering filigree under apprentices' watchful eyes, weavers threading looms with wool-dyed imperial blue. Politically, Persia teetered, the Muzaffarid dynasty clung to Shiraz. But Isfahan's governor, a Jalayirid holdover, had slain Timur's tax collectors in a fit of defiance, their heads impaled on the Naqsh-e-Jahan Square's fountains. Timur's host encircled the walls, 200,000-strong pavilions of crimson, felt dotting the plains like blood drops. He wore quilted silk akatan over chainmail, a gemmed scimitar at his belt, his limp masked by the stallion's sway. Emissaries rode under white flags, Qurans open on saddles demanding submission. The governor's reply, arrows feathered with defiance. Siege engines groaned to life, trebuchets lobbing naphtha jars that bloomed fireballs, shattering domes tiled in lapis. For a month, the air thickened with smoke's bitter bite, the cries of the wounded, a counterpoint to muezzin's fading calls. Famine gnawed bread rose to gold's price. Cats vanished from alleys. Enter Ahmed, a potter of 42, his hands calloused from decades shaping kalyan bowls in the Yolfa quarter. Son of a silk merchant lost to plague husband to Layla, who embroidered veils by lamplight, father to 3 daughters grown to womanhood. Fatima, the poetess, 20, Zaiba, the healer, 22, and little Soraya, wedded 18 to a caravan guard. Ahmed's workshop abutted the river, where he'd taught his girls the wheels turn, their laughter mingling with the water's murmur. On the eve of breach, as Timur's sappers tunneled beneath gates, Ahmed gathered his family in the prayer niche, palms pressed to prayer rugs worn threadbare. "We bend but do not break," he whispered, eyes tracing Layla's lined face, her silver-streaked hair coiled like a crown. They shared a final meal, dates, sticky with honey flatbread, crumbling dry tongues, parched bellies hollow from weeks of locust stew. Dawn broke with trumpets blare. The gate splintered under ram's fury, Timur's tumans pouring in like locusts, sabers glinting. Ahmed barricaded his door with a cedar beam, Layla murmuring surahs, the daughters clutching each other's hands, knuckles white as porcelain. Hooves thundered past, screams rising like steam merchants dragged from stalls their ledgers trampled. A soldier face masked in dust battered the door. It gave with a groan. Ahmed lunged with his potter's knife, slashing the man's cheek before a lance butt felled him, vision exploding white. Layla shielded the girls, her voice a shield, mercy in the prophet's name. But mercy was a luxury Timur rationed. The soldier inspected them like livestock at market, Layla's dignity, Fatima's trembling resolve, Ziba's defiant glare, Soraya's whispered pleas. He led Layla away first, the room falling to stunned silence, the air turning leaden. Hours passed. When they returned her, she could not stand her shawl-torn gaze adrift in a sea of unshed tears. Fatima prayed in silent Arabic lips, moving like leaves in wind she had not broken. Ziba tended her mother with herbal poultices, hands steady as stone. Soraya sang a lullaby from her wedding night voice, fracturing but unbroken. The act unfolded in the square, where artisans like Ahmed were herded potters, jewelers, calligraphers, spared for deportation to Samarkand's glory. But the rest, Timur's decree was clinical: one head per soldier to forge towers of admonition. Axes rose and fell, a rhythm like harvest scythes, blood pooling in mosaic gutters, staining turquoise to rust. Ahmed, bound with the able-bodied, watched Layla drag to the fore, her resistance a quiet fire, spitting defiance at the executioner. The blade entered swift. She fell without cry, breath stopping in a sigh. Fatima followed her poem unfinished on lips, Ziba tending a fallen neighbor to the last. Soraya clutching a shard of her father's bowl. Ahmed's turn came at dusk, the sky bruising purple, his final thought, Layla's honeyed dates. He perished with thousands body consigned to the river's swell. Among the victims were families with young children, their fates recorded in the chronicles, but too cruel to recount in detail. Here the youngest, those too innocent to comprehend, suffered in ways that twisted the soul, though Timur's protocol often separated them for later ransom or labor. Focus instead on Ahmed 42, whose workshop's echoes built Timur's own Bibi Khanim. By nightfall, 28 minarets of skulls rose, each one 500 strong, the wind whistling through empty sockets like dirges. Isfahan emptied 70,000 gone by Yazdi's count. The river choked with floaters' birds, wheeling over unburied dead. This wasn't about Ahmed or Layla. This was about the system, a protocol of pyramids turning rebellion into relic commerce, into cautionary tale. What it revealed of power structures, Timur's terror was egalitarian, in erasure no quarter for emir or beggar, but selective mercy for the skilled, a human capital ledger that repopulated Samarkand while hollowing Persia. It fit broader patterns of Mongol revival, Genghis's Yasa amplified where fear was currency submission, the tax. Modern parallels sting, consider Assad's barrel bombs on Aleppo's markets, or the Rwandan radio calls to machete. Both echo Timur's calculus, where spectacle breaks morale before steel does. Scholars debate intent. Mons sees strategy a nomad adapting to sedentary wealth's temptations. Morosi, in his 2004 portrait, probes pathology, the limp's phantom pain fueling a god complex. Long-term Isfahan lay fallow, a generation irrigation canals clogged with bone trade routes, detoured fostering the Safavid resurgence that later toppled Timurids. They didn't want martyrs. Martyrs inspire chronicles like Ibn Arab Shah's vengeful tome. They wanted ghosts' whispers in empty bazaars, warning, resist, and your city becomes its own grave. He's not just destroying individuals, he's dissolving the social fabric thread by thread, families unraveled, guilds, silenced faith's minarets mocking the void. Clavijo, touring the aftermath, noted the eerie quiet. No soul stirred where thousands once bartered. This act set the template: sack stack, spare, the useful scatter the rest. But the machine oiled now hungered for grander canvases. Persia bled, but India beckoned its thrones ripe for toppling. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder, the charnel sprawl of Delhi, where the machine scaled to apocalypse. You can stop anytime, but for those continuing, let's see this through together, honoring the ledgers that outlasted the flames. But he wasn't finished. Delhi called next, the golden bird of Hindustan, its minarets clawing at monsoon's underbelly. March 1398. The heat already a shroud air thick with jasmine from Qutb Minar gardens and the faint rot of Ganges silt. The Delhi Sultanate sprawled arrogant 500,000 souls in marble palaces, where Mahmud Shah Tughlaq held court elephants caparisoned in gold leaf, trumpeting through Chandni Chowk's arcades. Politically, it teetered, sultans rose and fell like monsoon floods, Hindu rajas chafing under Muslim yoke, while Timur's spies whispered of unrest from Herat to the Deccan. His army now, 100,000 Tumans hardened by Persian fords, crossed the Indus in winter's bite, fording icy torrents that numbed lame limbs. Timur rode central in a howdah of ebony and ivory advisors, fanning him with peacock feathers, his turban jeweled like a second crown. Emissaries bore gifts, Samarkand melons, Qurans illuminated in lapis, but the Sultan demurred, fortifying walls with 40,000 archers. Siege began with mangonels hurling Greek fire flames, licking sandstone battlements, the sky acrid with burning ghee from breached granaries. For 5 days the assault raged, arrows whistling like vengeful spirits, the ground slick with monsoon mud churned to bloody mire. Famine stalked inside rice hoarded in sultan's vaults, while streets echoed with children's hollow coughs. Meet Rajesh, a jeweler of 38, his stall in hose. Kaz, a trove of rubies faceted like captured stars. Born to a Brahmin scribe, wed at 16 to Priya, whose henned hands wove tales into saris. They raised 2 sons to manhood. Arjun, 21, a horseman in the Sultan's guard, lithe and quick with the tulwar, and Vikram, 19, apprenticed in the shop, fingers nimble as spider silk. Sundays they picnicked by the Yamuna, Priya's laughter, bubbling like the river Arjun, reciting Urdu ghazals under banyan shade. As Timur's host darkened the horizon, Rajesh shuttered his stall boarding windows with sandalwood planks scented of childhood festivals. The family huddled in the inner courtyard, oil lamps flickering shadows on murals of dancing apsaras. The invader limps, but his shadow engulfs, Arjun murmured, sharpening his blade eyes fierce as his father's. Priya lit incense to Lakshmi, its smoke curling like prayers for plenty amid scarcity bellies gnawing on millet gruel throats raw from dust-choked air. Breach came at dawn, gates sundered by iron-shod rams, Timur's horsemen surging like a saffron tide, sabers carving arcs through silk-clad defenders. Arjun fought at the 4 tulwar, clashing ring on ring until a mace felled him, body trampled under hooves. Rajesh heard the roar barricading the door, as looters battered Persian shouts mingling with Hindi pleas. The wood splintered, 3 soldiers entered, faces blackened by coal and coal-rimmed hate. They assessed like appraisers at auction, Priya's poise, her bangles chiming defiance. Vikram's youthful frame, trembling but unbowed. One seized Priya, dragging her to the threshold, the courtyard falling to a hush, broken only by her unbroken mantra. The door slammed. Time stretched the air, turning stale with unspoken dread. Vikram lunged, knife glancing off armor, felled by a boot to the temple. When they returned, Priya, she collapsed sorry, rent eyes hollowed to abyssal voids, yet her fingers traced a mudra of endurance. Vikram stirred, whispering of stars unseen. The square became abattoir Timur, from his pavilion decreed slaughter for the uprising spark. 100,000 Hindu prisoners beheaded pre-battle, their blood, a libation to victory. Axes bit deep, a staccato hymn, heads rolling into Juma Masjid's nave, staining prayer niches crimson. Rajesh, herded with survivors, witnessed Priya, led to the fore, her resistance aflame, spitting at the headsman, invoking Kali's wrath. The blade fell, she perished standing body, crumpling like wilted lotus. Vikram followed his apprenticeship's gems scattered in the dust. Among those swept up were families intact, till then young ones clutched in parental arms, their ordeals etched in the Sultan's frantic dispatches, but spared recounting here, their innocence a brief shield against the storm, though the chronicles note separations for enslavement, redirecting our gaze to Rajesh, 38, whose facets once caught light, now dulled in gore. By dusk, pyramids towered 5, each 20,000 skulls strong, the air buzzing with flies, birds descending in black clouds to feast on the reek. Delhi lay prostrate, hundreds of thousands gone, streets choked with putrefaction, famine, and pestilence, claiming the spared, for months no wings stirring in the desecrated sky. Yazdi tallies the enslavements, 100th season march to Samarkand, chains clinking like broken bells. This wasn't about Rajesh's rubies. This was the system at scale erasure, as empire building turning a subcontinent's jewel into a warning writ in vulture tracks. Power structures exposed Timur's meritocracy of meritless, where loyalty trumped lineage, but terror ensured it, dissolving caste and creed into common dust. Broader patterns. The Mongol echo, but refined Genghis raised for pasture, Timur for prestige, his Samarkand, a vampiric bloom on desolation's vein. Modern mirrors the rape of Nanking's mechanized horror, or ISIS's trophy videos, both leveraging spectacle to paralyze. Debate rages. Was it religious jihad, as Yazdi spins, or pragmatic depopulation, per Mons's analysis? Impacts lingered, Delhi's sultanate fractured paving, Mughal rise, but the cultural hemorrhage lost. Veda's silenced sitars echoed centuries. They sought not heroes but hollows. Ghosts don't revolt. He's unraveling the tapestry of tolerance threads of Hindu-Muslim weave, snapped bazaars to boneyards. Clavijo, hearing tales en route, marveled at the efficiency. 1 city fallen, 10 quail. The machine accelerated eyes on the Levant, where trade winds carried whispers of gold. What happened next reveals the machine's finesse. Aleppo gateway to the Franks, where spices whispered of Venice and Venice dreamed of silk. October 1400. Autumn's gold gilding the Euphrates bank's air, alive with the sizzle of kebabs from street braziers and the lowing of camels in the citadel's shadow. Aleppo hummed 150,000 merchants from Genoa to Gujarat, threading its souks the great mosque's ablution, fountains splashing cool reprieve. Mamluk Egypt held sway, but Baybars al-Jashnagir's garrison chafed under Timur's approach, spies reporting his Persian plunder. Timur's legions leaned from Delhi's hall, crested the anti-Taurus 80,000 sabers thirsting. He dismounted at camp leg, braced with silver rods, consulting astrologers over charts smeared with mutton fat. Parley failed arrows, answered olive branches. Trebuchets sang stones, pulverizing ramparts, dust clouds veiling the citadel like a funeral pall. Siege dragged 3 weeks the air, fetid with unburied mules, and despair's sweat defenders' catapults, lobbing naphtha that ignited thatched roofs in hellish bloom. Consider Elias a Frankish trader of 45, his warehouse in Bab Antakya, piled with Genoese velvet and Damascene steel. Orphaned in Cyprus raids wed to Miriam, a Syriac Christian, whose icons glowed in their alcove, they nurtured a daughter, Leah, 23, who tallied ledgers with a quill, sharp as her wit. Evenings they supped on olives, brined in clay jars. Miriam's tales of Edessa saints weaving faith's fragile web. As Timur's dust horizoned, Elias bolted his doors with iron bars, the family reciting psalms by candle-glow throats, dry from rationed well water, stomachs knotted on barley pottage. Breach-shattered midnight gates caved under powder blasts. Timur's vanguard flooding like ink on parchment cries in Chagatai, clashing with Arabic pleas. Elias armed with a crossbow, loosing bolts through arrow slits until a grapnel hooked the wall, pulling him down in a tangle of limbs. Miriam barred the inner room, Leah's voice steady. "The Lord is my shepherd." Soldiers breached their gaze, appraising Miriam's serene brow, Leah's unyielding stance. One hauled Miriam aside the chamber, silencing to echoes of scuffle. Time crawled. Leah bandaged Elias's gashed arm, her prayers a murmured shield. Returned. Miriam sagged robes, disheveled spirit adrift, yet anchoring with a whispered, "Forgive them." In the souks, the coal commenced. Timur's edict spared artisans for deportation, but the rest fed the pyre's swords, sweeping like scythes through prayer lines. Blood-sheeting cobblestones, the mosque's mihrab, splashed arterial. Elias chained with the skilled saw, Miriam paraded a spectacle of submission, her faith unbroken, crossing herself as the axe rose. She fell, body twitching to stillness. Leah resisted to the end quill, clutched like a talisman. Among the throng families with tender young were herded apart their recorded separations in Mamluk, annals too harrowing for detail. The innocents often ransomed or apprenticed, though grief's toll unmeasured. We turn to Elias, 45, whose velvets line Timur's own tents. By Eve Aleppo's heart stilled 50,000 perished souks smoldering the Euphrates bearing crimson tribute. Ibn Arab Shah tallies the deportees, 20,000 souls marched chains a caravan dirge. This wasn't Elias's silks. This was systemic scalpel work, excising Aleppo's polyglot pulse to monopolize trade's arteries. Power's anatomy bared Timur's terror, as tariff-deterring rivals by orphaning commerce. Genoese galleys rerouted Mamluk coffers bled. Patterned after Isfahan, but urbanized, it presaged Ottoman sieges where fear bought fealty. Parallels today, cartel blockades on migrant paths or sanctioned starving markets. Both wield absence as ally. Yazdi lauds the cleansing, but Mons dissects the economics deportations, restocked labor pyramids advertised rates. Legacy Aleppo's decline birthed Venetian envy, but culturally Syriac's hymns hushed icons smashed. Ghosts over merchants. They craved voids, not voices. The fabric frays interfaith alleys to ash. Clavijo's envoy noted the hush, trade's tongue cut. Onward to Damascus, the machine's quill poised to ink oblivion. On the third day after Aleppo's fall, as pyres still smoked on the plains, Timur's vanguard crested the anti-Lebanon eyes on Damascus, the Umayyad echo, where the Barada River sang through orchards heavy with apricot blush. January 1401, winter's chill nipping at cloaks of camel wool air, scented with orange blossom and the faint char of distant forges. Damascus bloomed eternal, 100,000 scholars and Sufis threading the Umayyad Mosque's colonnades libraries groaning under tomes from Baghdad to Cordoba. Mamluk governor Dahab controlled the citadel, but Timur's shadow, Aleppo's screams on spies' lips, froze resolve. His hosts, swollen with Levantine levies, encircled the walls, pavilions ringed by skull totems from prior sacks. Timur bundled in, Sable consulted ulama over iftars of lentil soup, his limp a metronome to tent-flap pacing. Parley farce gifts returned with insults. Mangonels thundered boulders, crumpling aqueducts, the river's song turning to drip-drip lament. Siege spanned weeks famine's fingers, prying at gates, the air cloying with unwashed bodies and fermenting dates, defenders' sorties repelled in sprays of crossbow bolts. Ibrahim, a librarian of 51, his alcove in the Ozem Palace stacked with vellum scrolls, Aristotle in Arabic Rumi's verses furled like prayers. Widowed young, he raised Aisha alone, now 26, a illuminator whose inks captured Quranic flourishes in lapis and gold. Mornings they broke fast on labneh and za'atar flatbread, Aisha's debates on Averroes sparking like fireflies. As Timur's dust veils rose, Ibrahim hid manuscripts in false floors, the pair barricading with cedar shelves, lamps guttering on sesame oil, throats parched from hoarded cistern, sips bellies echoing on fig paste, walls breached under sapper blasts, Timur's riders flooding like Barada flood, Chagatai war cries drowning Adhan. Ibrahim bolted the door Aisha wielding a bronze astrolabe as club felling one intruder before a spear grazed her side. Soldiers swarmed assessing Aisha's fierce intellect, her father's scholarly calm. One pulled Aisha to the shadows, the room hushing to breaths held. Ibrahim bandaged his wound, reciting dhikr. Returned, Aisha slumped ink smeared like war paint, but her eyes held stars' defiance. The mosque became charnel Timur's order, slay the unsubmissive burn the books that bred rebellion. Flames licked shelves, scrolls curling to ash, the air acrid with melting vellum and blood's copper. Ibrahim spared, as scribe watched Aisha let out her resistance poetry, quoting Rumi, "The wound is the place where light enters." The sword struck. She perished, light fading. Among the literate families with budding scholars were cold young minds' fates in Mamluk, records of mercy to veil their potentials, often conscripted or scattered grief's legacy. Attend to Ibrahim 51, whose scrolls seeded Timur's libraries. Damascus dimmed, 60,000 gone libraries pyres, lighting the night the river ash-flecked. Clavio confirms the book-burning's scope, not Ibrahim's Aristotle. The system knowledge is kindling, turning wisdom's womb to womb of ghosts. Structures laid bare, Timur's anti-intellectualism, purging polymathy to centralize lore in Samarkand. Pattern Alexandrian echoes, but nomadic burn to rebuild. Today's twins Taliban edicts on schools or cultural erasures in Uyghur camps. Ibn Arab Shah rails at the sacrilege Mons, at the myopia lost. Averroes' commentaries slowed Renaissance relays. Impacts Damascus's decline, fed Ottoman hunger, but Sufism splintered versus vapor. No martyrs, only memos, voids over volumes. Fabric incinerated learnings loomed to cinders. The machine peaked at Baghdad, jaws unhinging for the finale. While Damascus's embers glowed, Timur wheeled south, the Tigris beckoning like a vein to lance. June 1401, summer's furnace baking the ziggurats' ghosts, air shimmering with the salt of date palms and the distant brine of the Gulf. Baghdad Abbasid phantom housed 200,000 in labyrinthine alleys, where Caliphal tales lingered in coffeehouse yarns. Jalayirid Ahmed ibn Uwais garrisoned the round city, but Timur's repute, Damascus's pyres on couriers' tongues, sowed desertion. His army, 150,000, now forded the Diyala tents sprouting like malignant blooms. Timur, sweat-sheened under a damask pavilion, decreed quotas 2 heads per man to stack the caliph's own walls. Parley dissolved in arrow storms. Siege engines battered the Ishtar Gate's lion stones, tumbling like toppled idols, dust choking the Shat al-Arab's whisper. For 2 weeks, thirst-clawed cisterns poisoned bread dust. The air a miasma of dysentery and dread sorties crushed under horse tides. Farid, a physician of 47, his Hammam clinic by the Tigris, a haven of herbal steam and lancet precision. Heir to Avicenna's line, wed to Noor whose midwifery saved neighborhood births, they guided Omar 24, a surgeon's apprentice with steady hands. Vespers they shared, Tamerlane sherbet Noor's songs, lulling the day's wounds. Timur's host eclipsed Farid, sealed vials of theriac, the family fortifying with linen bolsters, lamps on almond oil, gullets raw from brackish sips, innards twisting on pulse pottage. Gates crashed under cannon roar, rare powder from China. Timur's horde inundating Persian gutturals, garbling Arabic screams. Farid dosed the wounded at his door, till sabers breached Noor, shielding Omar with a mortar. Intruders evaluated Noor's compassionate gaze, Omar's clinical poise. One bore Noor away, the clinic muting to drip of unguents. Farid stitched a gash intoning healing surahs. Returned Noor folded inward hijab awry, but her touch lingered balm. The Tigris ran red Timur's quota, frenzy soldiers returning heads or fabricating from kin pyramids mounting like ziggurats of spite, the air buzzing with carrion wings, blood's iron tainting the date harvest. Farid, conscripted for the court, beheld Noor paraded her mercy manifest, tending a foe mid-march. The blade descended. She succumbed, hands folded in final rite. Omar carved his path to pyre. Families with fledgling healers among them faced triage the young's plights in Jalayirid, logs a veil of sorrow, their skills often commandeered losses physic. Behold Farid, 47, whose theriac eased Timur's own gout. Baghdad bled dry 90,000 skulls, stacked city a husk, canals clogged with floaters. Yazdi logs the excess self-decapitations when quotas lagged, not Farid's lancets. The system medicine is metaphor healing hubs to harvest of horror. Power vivisected Timur's merit in mayhem, co-opting caregivers while culling cores. Pattern Saladin's sieges inverted terror, therapeutic for tyranny. Now, hospital bombings in Gaza triage twisted to tactic. Ibn Arab Shah decries the desecration, Marozzi, the hubris lost. Galenic texts delayed European pharmacy. Legacy Baghdad's eclipse invited Safavid Ottoman wars, but healing arts hybridized in exile. No saviors, only surpluses, hollows over herbs. The weave wasted care's continuum to carnage. While Timur was destroying Baghdad, he made one crucial error overreach the machine's gears, grinding against mortality's grit. His Tumans, sated on slaughter, chafed at endless march. Supply lines stretched thin as parchment scouts reporting Ming. China's walls unbreachable. The conspirators not daggers in dark, but descent in drifts. His sons Jahangir and Miran Shah embittered by favoritism. Jahangir, the crown prince, sidelined for paranoia-fueled purges. Miran Viceroy in Georgia, whose 1404 stroke Timur dismissed as weakness. Motivations festered. Jahangir craved the throne unbloodied Miran revenge for a brother's blinding in 1393 court intrigue. Lesser emirs like those of Fars whispered of satiety. Persia's plunder palled India's gold guttered. The plot unfolded in Samarkand's winter 1404, couriers bearing coded missives in invisible ink, astrologers bribed to foretell ill stars. Timur sensing winds shift executed plotters, piecemeal heads on spikes along the Registan, but the fracture spread Tumans deserting for home hearths. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong variable time itself. February 1405. Otrar step en route to China. Snow whips like flails tents buckling under gales that howl of unfinished symphonies. Timur 68, lame leg, numb in the cold pours over maps. By brazier glow advisors murmuring of frozen rivers. Fever grips sudden ague from the chill or poison in the kumis. He weakens breath, ragged calling Jahangir to bedside. The stars align for you, he rasps, but eyes betray doubt. Jahangir nods, masking triumph. By the 18th, Timur breathes his last body, swathed in silk, borne back to Samarkand's Gure Amir in a gold-draped bier. No blade, no tumult, just the steps in different white. Aftermath cascaded, Jahangir claimed the yurt, but Miran contested fracturing the realm into appanages. Kabul to one son, Herat to another, the machine devolving to squabbles. Conspirators Jahangir ruled 2 years before death. Miran blinded in reprisal riots. Chaos reigned. Persian satraps revolted golden horde, nipped flanks. China unassailed. Ulugh Beg, grandson, inherited scraps his observatory, a requiem for ambition. Thousands more perished in the power vacuum. Baghdad's remnants sacked anew by Ak Koyunlu raiders, Delhi's slaves freed to famine. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything loyalists' legacies, the very steps it scorched. The system survived fragmented in Timurid miniatures that romanticize the reign, but the blueprint-etched terror's torque snaps back. Samarkand flowered briefly, then faded a ghost garden on graves. It's not about the pyramid's permanence. It's about what power does when it tries to erase people, and what happens when they refuse to disappear. The discovery came in 1941 amid Orenburg's July heat, where Soviet archaeologist Mikhail Mason, sweat-soaked in a linen shirt, directed laborers at Guri Amir's crypt. Funded by Tashkent Academy, the dig pierced the mausoleum's marble tiles cracked from earthquakes, air stale with centuries' sigh. Mason's spade hit cedar heart, pounding as he pried the lid. Inside, a sarcophagus of ebony inlaid with mother-of-pearl verses from the Zafarnama. He felt it first, a chill beyond the tomb's damp, the weight of unquiet dead. Lifting the lid, they beheld bones arranged in repose, the right leg shortened arrow scars on femur and ulna, confirmed by x-rays shipped to Moscow. Gold thread from a turban clung to the skull hazel eyes sockets, staring accusation. Scientific dating dendrochronology on cedar carbon, 14 on linens, pegged it to 1405, corroborating Yazdi's burial rites. What it proved Timur's mortality, the lame conqueror's clay feet unearthed by a regime that saw in him Stalin's mirror, tyrant to tyrant. Mason's journals, declassified in 1991, evoke the moment, "We touched history's fever, and it burned." Why it matters ripples forward. This exhumation amid World War's thunder, connected to our day as Allied bombs fell on Dresden Soviet spades, reminded that empires end in earth, not eternity. Psychologically, it illuminates the pathology narcissism forged in loss per Marazi's lens, where childhood voids birthed adult voids. Parallels sting, Putin's Ukraine grinds echo Timur's quotas, ethnic maps redrawn in rubble. Or Myanmar's Rohingya pyres, modern skull towers and displacement camps. Remembering matters because erasure invites repetition. Without Ibn Arab Shah's bile, we'd romanticize the lame as lame duck. With it, we see the system. It's not religion's fault, but power's perversion trying to ink out the other, only for bones to resurface. The Timurids lasted a century but couldn't bury 17 million's murmur. Think they didn't live to see Samarkand's stars, but their ledgers lit the way. Redefined victory, Ahmed's pots rebuilt bridges, Rajesh's facets flashed in miniatures, Elias's threads traded on. They didn't win the war, but they left marked scars that teach. Ahmed was meant to disappear. That was the plan. Layla's prayers, Priya's mantras, Miriam's psalms, Noor's midwifery, Aisha's inks, all consigned to the Tigris' forgetful flow, the Yamuna's silted sigh. Rajesh's stall shuddered eternal, Ibrahim's scrolls, ash underfoot, Farid's vials shattered like hopes. The machine tallied them, as tally's variables voided for victory's vanity. But they didn't disappear. They're still here. In the Zafarnama's grudging lines, where Yazdi admits the spared artisan's hands trembled less in Samarkand. In Ibn Arab Shah's Ajaib, smuggled from chains, his venom a vessel for the vanished. In the ground, archaeologists like Masson excavated bones, whispering of resistance in rigid spines. In Clavijo's dry dispatches, where a Spanish eye noted the pyramid's precarious lean toppling in first rains. And now, they're here with you. Because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Ya qalb la tansa al-dam al-mazloom. Heart, forget not the blood of the oppressed. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are how the past stays alive, how Ahmed's wheel turns anew in some Delhi potter's hands, how Layla's surah echoes in a woman's unbowed stance against today's tyrants. These stories matter because they bridge the chasm 14th century skulls to 21st century screens, reminding that systems of erasure be they Timur's tumans or algorithms amplifying hate thrive in our apathy. We owe the past vigilance, not veneration of victors. To question the blueprints, dismantle the machines before they were again. What we owe Elias's velvet to weave inclusion's cloth stronger, to Farid's lancet, precision in empathy's cuts. In grappling this darkness, we light the ledger's conversations that convert graves to gardens, where flourishing returns unstacked. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why remembering matters, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck you. Share what you're thinking. Ask your questions. Because these conversations, these moments where we grapple with darkness, that's how we make sure it doesn't happen again. If you believe voices like theirs deserve to be heard, subscribe. Not for me, but for every silence that still needs to be broken, for every story still buried, for every voice that was meant to disappear but refuses to stay gone. Timur ruled for 35 years, built a system that showed every future despot how to stack submission, and the blueprint never disappeared, but neither did Ahmed's unfired clay.